welcome to the latest edition of SFI Not So Live. I'm Jay Evans, your host. I'm joined today by three industry stalwarts, as always, two from Saffron for intermediaries and a special guest. So let's start with Saffron and Phil. Phil, welcome back. It's not your first time, but let's do a little introduction to the audience as who you are and what you do at Saffron.
Yeah, I'm Phil Lawford. I look after our national accounts and I've got 30 years plus in the industry.
You don't look a day like you could do more than 10, Phil, honestly.
Oh,
And
thank you,
then
Jay.
from the oldest to the youngest, sorry, Phil. Simon, why don't you introduce
Fair
yourself,
enough.
please?
Simon O'Donnell. I'm the field-based BDM for Saffron, covering the south of the UK, looking after all our brokers in the south.
Amazing. And we are very lucky to have the lovely Nick Murray joining us. Nick, why don't you do little introductions to who you are, because you are a special guest for us. So just little introductions, where you work, what you do, and who you are. I'm sure the people know already.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Nick Murray. I'm the technical director for Corico, independent mortgage experts in London. I've been in the industry for over 20 years, since I graduated back in the 90s. Phil may be the oldest, but not by that much.
There we go. Phil, you've been rescued slightly. And to be fair, I'm a lot older than I look as well. Okay, so let's kick straight off. So for those of you who haven't joined us before, SFI Not So Live picks apart some of the news in the mortgage and property industries, where we have a look at some of the stories that are affecting you as brokers, and we give our own personal opinions. You might not agree with them, but we try not to be too controversial, and we definitely don't be political. But we do have a look at some of these things. That's actually a lie, Nick. Moving on to story number one. So, story number one today is that the Bank of England has decided to drop an affordability test. So, the story kicks off. It's on Mortgage Introducer. The Bank of England has announced it will withdraw its mortgage market affordability test recommendation effective from August the 1st, 2022. Phil, I'm going to come to you because this is big news, right?
Yeah. It's good news, but I don't think it's going to have a radical effect on affordability. And I've sort of tested my views over the last week, speaking to a lot of colleagues and people I know in the industry. So I've talked to a lot of peer lenders this week about it, and also brokers too. And I think the general consensus is it's great that this 3% guide that the regulator puts on lenders to stress test 3% above their sort of revert to rate is going to be removed. But the rules we have to follow still require us to assess affordability, take into account income, expenditure, and future interest rates. So I think the biggest surprise was the timing of it, particularly as the economy and things are looking worse. But it does make affordability modelling probably slightly more dynamic for lenders. But there are other pressures coming into play in the market. So ONS data, due to rising costs of living, that's going to go up. So that's going to affect lenders' affordability assessments the other way. So even if I suppose what we give us in one hand, we'll see taken away in the other. So I think the rise in ONS data might possibly negate it. So those factors will probably even themselves out. Speaking to peer lenders, I think a lot of our peer lenders are probably likely to take up the removing the 3% stress test rate. But I think, and I'm sure Nick will concur with this, I think the biggest blocker to affordability at the moment is actually lenders have to also adhere to a loan to income cap. So most of our lending, we have to adhere to a 4.5 times income cap, and that's actually the biggest blocker. So I think only something like about 15% of lenders' lending book can be over 4.5 times income. So I think that's still the biggest blocker really there. So it's going to make it's positive, but it's not going to have a massive radical change in affordability.
Nick, you look like you had something to say there. What do you think? Same sort of opinion, or do you differ?
I pretty much agree with Phil, to be honest. The Bank of England and regulators can rarely win when they try to make things a little easier or they have to make things a little harder. We definitely need to stay in the realms of responsible lending. We don't want to be starting to give people way too much money that they can afford now, but they can't afford in a few years. If we just take the example of people on interest only mortgages, they would have had rates somewhere between 1 and 2.5% for the last decade. They could now well be facing 3, possibly 4% within the next year. Well, that effectively will double their payments per month. Now, can they actually cope with that? And it's similar for repayment mortgages. Also, first-time buyers is probably one of the main reasons why we've been crying out for changes in affordability. Because if you're a first-time buyer and you've been renting at £1,500 a month, and then you go to get a mortgage and the payments would be £1,100 a month, but the lender says, I'm really sorry, we can't lend you the amount of money you want because it's not affordable. And they're saying, but it is affordable, I've been paying it. And so it is all very, very difficult. And yes, I totally agree with Phil in the idea that if affordability is relaxed slightly, it will actually be soaked up by the cost of living, which will impact on people's net disposable income. And we don't want to put people in positions where they are going to find making payments difficult, they go into arrears, it wrecks their credit history, and potentially they end up getting repossessed. It's not a place that anyone wants us to be in. The loan to income multiples is possibly the area that personally I would have liked to have seen relaxed, because if somebody can afford to borrow more than 4.5 times income, 5.5 times, because they've got very few outgoing financial commitments, then why can't they actually do it? And the timing is awkward, because we've been crying out for it for ages whilst interest rates were stable and really low. Now that they're going up, there seems to be a bit of relaxation, but it's not going to have the effect that we were hoping for. So I'm with Phil. It's nice to see. It's something which could well benefit over future years, but maybe in the next 2 or 3 years, we won't see much. Borrowers won't see much benefit from it. But the Bank of England couldn't relax both of them. You can't relax affordability and take the income multiples out, because that could have produced a big step change in the amount people can borrow. That in turn would allow people to buy properties at higher prices and could create another spike in the property market, which is also something we don't want. So before we all bash the Bank of England, I think we have to think a little bit about the potential unintended consequences. And hopefully, with one little change, we might not get many of those consequences.
Yeah, I'd just like to have seen. I'd like to probably have seen it the other way around. Is affordability, I suppose, stress testing the limit on that, but the LTI cap raised. Personally, I think that would have been more practicable. That's just me.
Well,
Let's just
go sorry. I say one little thing about stress testing, just to put it into slight context, is the stress tests are designed to, as well, future-proof against disasters.
Yeah.
And earlier on in the year, when Ukraine was invaded, let's not call it a military exercise, call it what it is, it was invaded. And I believe that the Bank of England turned around to an awful lot of lenders to talk about their capitalisation requirements and said that they didn't actually have to do them this year because this is what they've been preparing for. This sort of perfect storm of inflation, uncertainty in all sorts of areas. And in a way, the stress tests that have been applied over the last 10 years, it is now that they are coming into play.
Yeah.
As people's payments go up, they should hopefully be able to afford it as a direct result of the stress test that was applied to their mortgage application years earlier. So I get where everybody is coming from, but it is not a simple situation.
Yeah. Just sticking with affordability, Simon, I'm going to come to you for this one because you're on the ground. But affordability, it is really impacting the market now. We're starting to see it. We're going to come on to this story, but there's a 10% downturn in completions in the first quarter. So we're seeing it, and we're seeing the effects of everything. As Nick just said, the war in Ukraine. Let's not gloss it over. It's a war. the war in Ukraine, everything that's going on there, our cost of living is going through the roof. Affordability naturally is going to be affected. How has it been for you in these months? In these months that this has been happening and the cost of living crisis has been kicking in, what's it been like for brokers and their clients? Is it a struggle?
Yeah, it has been. Obviously, it's been tougher to afford mortgages. We found that perhaps people that have done dips earlier in the year at a lower stress rate because the ONS statistics have gone up and the cost of living, etc., have come back. Perhaps the clients found a property and they've run the same dip, and we've changed our stress test, and that loan's now no longer affordable. We found that a few times, which has been a difficult one, but it's yeah, it's been tough, and it's only going to get tougher by the looks of things. The inflation increasing, the ONS statistics going up. It's a difficult world out there. But having said that, it shows no signs of stopping. It's relentless at the moment. The levels of applications we're getting in, the service levels at Saffron are probably a little bit higher than where we want them to be. But that's just because of the pure volume we're getting in, which obviously is never a bad thing. But yeah, despite the cost of living, despite the stress tests, etc., no signs of slowing
The
down.
thing is, though, Nick, and I think you'll agree with me on this. The government uses the property market to balance the economy and keep the economy moving. We saw that during COVID. They tried as hard as they possibly could to keep the property market going. Um, are we at risk here of them pushing so much into the property market that actually, we're going to start reaping the effects? I mean, this property market is still in a boom. It's still the house prices are still high. Affordability is getting more difficult. What do you think the immediate future is going to look like?
Oh, so we're looking for a crystal ball. Excellent.
It's going to be a crystal ball. None of us know, and every time we say something, we
No.
generally get it wrong. But we can have a go.
So yes, so I will urge all listeners to go to the kitchen and grab a huge pinch of salt ready for this one. Personally, I think that the housing market is likely to soften somewhat after the summer holidays. There is usually a bit of a natural break whilst a considerable portion of the potential property buying public go on holiday with their children, take time out, and then they come back at the end of August, beginning of September, and start to reassess what it is that they're actually likely to do. And if they have any desire to move house and get in before Christmas, then they've got effectively September to agree a price, and then October, November, December with an attempt to exchange and complete before the festivities. And I think that they will be looking at the cost of their mortgages. They will be looking at the way that prices have actually risen. They'll be looking at inflation and what the economy is actually doing. And I think a fair chunk of them will take a view that now is not the right time to buy. There will be, of course, plenty who will have been searching for properties for the last 4 months, and they will continue to look to buy. But I think the number of transactions could actually fall from where they've been. I think many parts of the industry will be glad to see the number of transactions reduce, the number of mortgage applications come in, because there is a lot of pressure on lenders and conveyancers as well. So I think actually the prices will stop rising anywhere near as fast as they have been in the last 2 or 3 years, and the property market will cool somewhat. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. 10% increase in prices per year is not a good place to be in the long term. And eventually a correction will be required. And we don't particularly want a large correction, also known as a property crash. So I do think Q4 is likely to be fairly telling as to what will happen. But from brokers' perspectives, I think remortgages will carry on being strong and possibly even getting stronger, as people are very keen to secure a new rate long before a lender can allow access to a product transfer. So it is going to be a very unusual 12 months.
As it has been. I don't think any of us could have predicted what's happened in the last 3 years, and we keep getting proved either right or wrong. Let's see what our crystal ball predictions for this month will say in the next few months. So,
Yeah,
welcome back,
come
Phil.
back to
We
me in
lost
12
Phil for a
months.
second. Okay, so it doesn't lead seamlessly, but it does lead a little bit onto the next one. The next story, which came from Mortgage Solutions, which is somebody has branded first-time buyers as a cash cow for the Treasury coffers, which caught my attention, as you can imagine. So government must urgently raise the tax-free stamp duty band by £100,000 and consider scrapping tax altogether to prevent even first-time buyers from becoming a cash cow, a campaign group has argued. Now, we've seen the effects of the stamp duty and changes of stamp duty. We know what positivity that can have. Nick, you've read the story. It obviously is an opinion. We can't take it as anything gospel, but I just thought it was an interesting one for us to have a debate on. What's your thoughts?
When I initially saw the article, I was thinking, how on earth could first-time buyers who have sort of an exemption to about £300,000, and they still maintain that exemption even for purchase prices up to £500,000, how could that necessarily be sort of cash cow? But actually, when you think about the property market across the entire UK, there, of course, are many regions where the first-time buyer or typical first-time buyer price is below the 500k or indeed below the 300k. So, in a way, it doesn't so much affect them, but there are actually considerable portions of the UK where those purchase prices are higher. And as a result, I do think those bandings need to be adjusted. Again, the problem for any sort of government or treasury looking to adjust the bandings is what if prices then fall? So then they don't get as much revenue as the government does need. The government needs revenue massively to pay for all the things that they have done over the last sort of 2 or 3 years. But they do look out of step, and I do think that a review is needed of those bandings. And one of the issues has been the amount of stamp duty at the top end of the market, where so a lot of attention is drawn to first-time buyers, and rightly so. But at the top end of the market, where there is an awful lot of money, the amount of tax that they pay and the amounts that people who are downsizing might still have to pay means that those properties don't sell very often, and as a result, it slows down the housing market because it just isn't the rapid turnover of property to bring more supply to the housing market to enable first-time buyers to buy. And when you don't have the supply, poor first-time buyers are often in competition with buy-to-let investors who they don't have bottomless pits of cash, but paying an extra 5-10 grand for property is nothing to them. Therefore, they get outbid, which is very harsh when you're desperately trying to get on the housing ladder. So I think a review is in order, and that article actually highlights one aspect of it very well.
I agree, and I think I was quite shocked with some of the stats in there with regards to sort of house prices, and we do see it. I live in, for your benefit, Nick, you won't know this, but I live in Norfolk, and my house is paid off. The value of my house has tripled since I bought it, because of the nature of where I am, the developments happening around me, but also it would now be unaffordable for me as a single person. If I'd got a mortgage on this house now in my 20s, there's no way in living hell I'd be able to do that. So there is that balance, and I think it really does depend on where you are. You said that, Nick. It depends on where you are in the country because house prices vary. Simon, you're nodding. You're nodding away, Sad. Do you agree? Do you think stamp duty for first-time buyers is a thing we can get rid of?
Yeah, this article actually brought back a lot of pain because I'm just looking at it now. And I remember we bought our first home on the 26th of October 2017, and then they announced the scrap of stamp duty on the 22nd of November, so less than 30 days later. So I was a bit gutted at the time, as you can imagine. I missed out by about 25 days. So yeah, I'm very much in favour of stamp duty being abolished for first-time buyers across the board, no matter what the value of the property.
Where could they recoup the money, though? This is the thing, as Nick was saying, we need the money to go in the coffers. So where are they going to get money from? Nick, what's your thoughts? Is it second home purchasers? Can we target them? That seems to be the go-to thing at the moment.
It is a go-to thing at the moment, and I'm very reluctant that there should be much more intervention in that, because we are a capitalist society, and intervening in any market, not just the property market, but say the food market or the alcohol market or anything like that, it has repercussions. And if somebody has money and they would like to buy a property, who are we to say you're not allowed to do that? And as it were, it feels like a knee-jerk reaction to a systemic problem that's been around for decades of just not enough property and not enough infrastructure to support properties outside cities where they want to be. So not enough trains, not enough buses, not enough arterial roads. But also, you're living in one of those areas and someone says, we're about to build a dual carriageway through your back garden. Naturally, you're going to protest about it strongly and vociferously. So it isn't particularly easy. I think that the second-time buyers buy-to-let market has been hit enormously over the last since 2016. And every time somebody tries to intervene in those markets and create more taxation for, especially for landlords, what we're actually doing is we're forcing a lot of landlords out of the market, which means they don't get replaced. There's not enough rental stock for people to actually rent. And then you'll have potentially renters saying the rent's gone up, we can't even afford to live somewhere. So they can't afford to buy somewhere, they can't afford to rent somewhere. Have to be very, very careful what we do in those markets. As it happens, what I read this morning is that there are more government targeting on empty properties. So people who buy properties and leave them empty, no one can actually live in them. They're not living in them themselves. And I think that's possibly more likely to be an area that's going to be targeted because there is a social argument there that that sort of thing perhaps shouldn't be allowed to go on as much as it does. Or if you are going to do it because you've got the money, then you can pay for the privilege of leaving it empty and not allowing anybody to live in it.
That's a really good point, actually. I really like that. And something you just said, sorry, Phil, but I'm just going to, because it's going to flow naturally, goes on to our City AM story of government admits that most Brits will not benefit from Boris Johnson's benefit to Brits housing plans. I haven't put that in for the headline. I've put it in so that, I have to say, we're not going to be political. We may have to be on this one slightly. So I'm going to move on to that a little bit because, Nick, you just said about the infrastructure and the lack of. One thing we have a major issue with in this country is social housing, which is why we've got an increase in private landlords because social housing took a drop. Phil, I know you've got an opinion on this. We've talked about it before. There is a huge social housing gap. The social housing that's been sold hasn't been replaced. So therefore, you've then got these social houses have gone off to be private rented houses, maybe second homes or buy to lets or whatever. But either way, something you just said really resonated with me, and that is our infrastructure. And I expected this announcement that came a few weeks ago. I expected this to be a bit of a chalice going forward, a bit of a future dynamic way of looking. But actually, as we've now seen, it's not going to benefit very many people at all, is it, Phil?
Unfortunately, we fear that is going to be the case. Well, sorry, Phil.
Go on, Phil, because we'll catch you while you're here. I'll cut this bit out, don't worry. Phil, do you want to... are you still with us? No, Nick, carry on, because I think we've lost Phil.
Okay. Unfortunately, I don't think that the impact is going to be as positive as the government would like. To allow people in social housing to potentially buy their property in the same way that a council right to buy is actually to be applauded. It's an idea. It will allow some people to do it, which is absolutely terrific. The question is whether or not they will actually be able to afford to buy it. And again, it's down to incomes, it's down to expenditure, it's down to affordability, and what the price of those properties is going to be. And then there was the announcement that lenders should look to take housing benefits into account when calculating affordability, which again, as a headline, sounds, well, terrific. You might be enabling people to do it, but when you actually look at the figures and look at the amount of income those people have and the amount that they would need to borrow, would those benefits actually support the loan size that they need? Beyond that, some of those benefits they do receive are not actually guaranteed for life. They are there for a period of time. They are means tested. If somebody's situation changes, they get some form of income. Their benefits could actually reduce.
Mm-hmm.
So, from a responsible lending perspective, would lenders be doing the right thing by lending somebody whose sole income is benefits a significant sum of money that they have to repay every month? And if those benefits change, they would potentially struggle to maintain those payments and could lose their home. Whereas if they'd stayed in the social housing, they probably would have kept their home. Whereas I see it as a positive idea, I'm not convinced it's going to positively affect enough people to make such a difference. And then you've got the issue, if the housing associations things do raise capital as a result of selling them, will they be able to procure replacement properties, or will their stock diminish, exacerbating the problem for the future?
Well, I can answer. I saw an interview with Michael Gove, which I thought was very interesting, in that he said it'd be one for one. So for every social housing house that's sold, they will build another social housing house, which sounds great, but actually, in reality, that takes time. You can't build a house or a plot with a load of houses on in 5 minutes, or in 5 weeks. You know, the time it could take for potentially this person to get a mortgage. But Simon, just going on the stress testing and the benefits and everything else. For you now, benefits are not something that you can consider as part of affordability. So surely, from a lender perspective, this is tripe. I don't want to say that, but I can't get my head around how somebody on benefits will be able to afford to get a mortgage. Simon, how do you think is this even feasible?
Yeah, just sort of very similar opinion to Nick in the sense that the means tested and they're not guaranteed for life. And what you might be getting now is very different from what you might be getting 5 years ago. Rates increasing all the time by the looks of it, or certainly going to plateau at some point. Arguably, it's irresponsible lending to sort of to use the benefits as the affordability, which is perhaps what a reason why Saffron don't really dip into that type of market.
I think as well, another concern for me, Nick, we were just talking about infrastructure and property. What we noticed from the able to buy Margaret Thatcher years and coming out of that, and all those people that had the opportunity to buy their council houses, yes, they could afford the mortgage, but they couldn't afford any repairs. So what actually happened was entire estates were suffering from lack of investment in the houses. The houses weren't necessarily built with the best quality. So actually, our stocks diminished in quality as much as anything else across the board. Is this not just going to fuel that again?
It could do. It genuinely could do. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed around the country is the amount of house building outside sort of market towns. And then you sort of look at it, right? So you put up 200, 300, 400 houses in a few big fields, but you've got one tiny little road joining onto another tiny little road to get out. There's no train station anywhere nearby. There's Whereas years ago, when councils were trying to get the housing problem solved, we're talking this is post 1918, from the slums all the way through into the 1970s. That they tried to create communities, with varying levels of success, but they said it has to have X number of shops within it. It has to have a church or some other place of worship within it, which might not be as important nowadays as it was then. But it would also have to have a primary school. It would have to have this. It would have to have that. You've got to put doctor's surgery in there. They made sure that there were sort of rail links, and none of that seems to be happening so much. And it makes it very difficult for people who say, right, well, I'd like to work in London, but I can't afford to live in London, so I need to live outside, but I can't even get to a blooming train station. And if I do, there's nowhere to park my car,
Yeah.
which makes everything unattractive. So these things do have to be thought through and funded. That's the other problem. They have to be funded accurately, as opposed to just thinking of pound per square foot. If we put X number of houses in there, thank you very much. Job done. No, job not done. Sorry.
Phil, welcome back. I just want to touch. We're talking about the first time buyer story. Still, oh no, we're not. That's a lie. We're not. Let me start that again. We're talking about the new government policy still, and we're talking
Yeah.
about this using benefits to get a mortgage and buy your house association home. Now, I've delved a little bit deeper to find out those benefits are top up benefits if your partner is working, not in the headlines, never is. Do you honestly think that this is? We discussed the last announcements during the budget, and we realised that it was a damp squib. Is this another one?
Yeah, totally. I mean, without wishing to be political, but I just think the announcement was put out there to try and hide other issues and problems that are going on personally, and I can't see it as anything else. And yeah, so I have been political there, but unapologetically. Yeah, I think it was a
Yeah.
stunt, and I don't I don't agree about increasing right to buy on social housing for social housing either. I think it's a completely stupid idea and will just further destroy social housing stock that this country really needs. The answer is to rebuild or build more housing stock. And if there are right to buy, those funds should be ring fenced to replenish housing stock if it's sold off. Yeah, those are my views on it anyway.
We allow personal views on here, and anybody who follows me on Twitter, I'm not going to say anything
May
political
not
because all my
necessarily be
politics on my Twitter account.
yeah,
So feel free to go and have a look and get destroyed
yeah,
by my opinions
yeah,
on the government. I'm not going
yeah.
to say
So
on
those are
here.
my personal views. Yeah,
But
not necessarily the views of my employer,
okay,
but
no,
yeah, those are my
well
personal
caveated.
views.
I'm going to chuck my two pence worth in here in that I think the government are very quick to put these things out, but don't necessarily put the meat into the pie until after. And I think so. Let's see what happens over the coming months. Johnson tried to balance this again yesterday in an interview. I heard an interview him yesterday trying to get people to buy into it and trying to get people to explain it and understand it. But at the moment, for the sake of the podcast, no housing association and no lenders are signed up to this at all as yet. So that just gives you an idea that this is just a policy out there. Simon, I didn't give you a chance to have your say. What was your, again, personal opinion? Caveat, this is a personal opinion podcast, even though we represent our companies.
Yeah, very similar. A caveat that it's personal opinion, not Saffron Building Society's opinion. But
And I think,
no good.
personal view, I don't know what you guys think, but I think an investment of the level that the government invests in other things, if they could do that in the infrastructure, property infrastructure, there's no reason why the buy-to-let portfolio can't continue to grow as it is. Social housing can continue to grow and improve. And actually, it might balance itself out a lot easier. I think this is trying to tap into aspirations of people that don't necessarily have aspirations to buy a home. When they've got a lifetime contract rental with a social housing and they're on benefits, I can imagine if I went to, I don't know, the local estate and asked a load of people in house association houses, they're not even thinking about buying the house because they think, how can I afford to replace the boiler? What if my ceiling falls down in my bedroom? What if my roof tiles need replacing? People on benefits don't have that much in the way of savings. So it's really got to be considered and thought through. So fingers crossed there'll be some meat inside the pie over the coming weeks. But thanks for your personal opinions. It is appreciated. Moving on to exactly the same subject to a degree, we're flipping over to the Renters Reform Bill, which is, according to the FT Advisor, could shrink the property market. Now, we've discussed this. Do you think there's going to be a shrinking of the buy-to-let market? Do you think that the buy-to-let market is going to suffer from a shrink? I know it's had a real big boom. Phil, I know this is a big area. Simon, I know it's a big area for you guys. Are you concerned about the renters bill? Are brokers saying they're concerned about it? Either one, go first.
Um, I think professional landlords are in that market and they'll stay in there because they know what they're doing. It will probably have some contraction on the, I suppose, amateur landlord, really. I think accidental landlords will still remain because people's circumstances will dictate that they become accidental landlords. That won't change. But I think I picked up what Nick said earlier between my connection problems. We do need a vibrant private rental sector. It's really, really important. So we need to be very careful about what we do with legislation and interference with the private rental sector because makes an important component of our market. So yeah, I think there will be a bit of contraction, but the professional landlords will stay in there. And I suppose the other point related to this is we seem to see the expat market is still holding up. You know, our levels of expat lending continues. So that tells me that the appetite to own UK property is still there, and that's not diminishing.
Simon?
Yeah, similar to Phil. A lot of the buy-to-let landlords that we get at Saffron are portfolio landlords, so 5 properties, 10 properties, 15 properties plus. So we don't tend to get the odd one, first time buyer, first time landlord, but not too many in the region of sort of less than 5. So I don't think it'll have too much of an effect on us. And yeah, as Phil said, expat buy-to-let is and continues to be one of our most sort of popular inquired about products over the last 18 months probably. So I can't imagine it will have too much of an effect on us personally.
Nick, I'd like to get your opinion on this from a market perspective. What do you think?
Um, I love reading a headline and thinking, wow, that's a bold headline. All of a sudden, landlords are going to leave the market, are they? And then when I read the actual article and sort of think, right, so what's actually happened? Well, they're trying to give a few more rights to tenants. And the thing is, I couldn't help but think, right, they're targeting the unscrupulous landlords, the landlords that have really bad properties. They might provide below market rent, go, it's a bit cold, it's a bit damp, it's this, that, and the other, so we'll charge less. But then these people they are vulnerable, and it's designed to protect those. One of the reasons that a lot of pressure has been applied to the rental market and sector is that a survey was done quite a few years ago for rental properties around the world, and the UK rental property stock as a whole is one of the worst in the Western world. In our industry, we tend to meet the landlords who are actually decent. They're buying decent properties. They've got decent tenants. They look after the properties. I've heard landlords on the phone defending their tenants with lettings agents. So all that good stuff. I think what this is actually designed to target is those that we don't see. Those that buy grim properties, they don't upgrade them. They get people in who are vulnerable due to lack of income and stress and anxiety, and those people are locked into their properties, and then they try and get them out for no reason because someone will suddenly turn around and say, I'll pay you an extra £50 a month. Lovely, right, you're out, you're the next one's in.
Yeah.
And those are the practices that they're trying to target. And if those landlords left, I will be absolutely honest and say I wouldn't lose any sleep over it whatsoever.
Phil, I know we've just had this conversation about social housing, so we'll come to you because I know you're going to be really honest about it. But isn't that just a direct reflection on the fact that the need for these cheap home landlords is because of the lack of social housing? So we're actually, as Nick quite rightly
Yeah,
said, they are vulnerable people in these properties because that's all they can afford. And
absolutely.
actually, it's
And
a knock-on
I
effect, isn't it?
just, yeah, no, I just passionately believe that we need more social housing for more vulnerable people in society here, and we just don't have enough, and that needs to be solved. And uh, yeah,
And
absolutely.
Nick, you're absolutely right. When you read this article, there's not all negative because actually, before you get to page 2, there is a piece in here that actually protects landlords, so good landlords, that actually it gives them more opportunity to gain possession of the house if they've got antisocial tenants or if they want to sell their property. So the bill isn't attacking every landlord, as you say.
No,
It's trying to get this dirty practice out of the way and saying to those that Simon mentioned, these non-hobby landlords, these proper pro landlords, and saying you're fine because you're doing what we expected of you. We're trying to weasel out these idiots that are in the market for the money and not caring a thing about the properties that they're providing.
yeah. And don't forget, landlords should be using assured short-hold tenancy agreements, which have an end date, and they can negotiate with the tenants as they come towards the end of it. They can refuse to renew it. They can allow them to roll on a monthly basis. There's plenty of options for good landlords to conduct their business in a perfectly acceptable way, and the vast majority do. So I generally think it's targeting. If people are interested in it, they should perhaps have a little look at the program if they can find it. I can't remember the title of it. Where I think it's BBC invited some landlords to live in their tenants' properties.
Oh, I
It
didn't
was
see
only a
that.
couple of years ago,
Brilliant.
and they had landlords who were really fairly wealthy individuals and successful businesses, but they'd never even gone to visit the properties. And naturally, they're going to find tenants and properties that have problems to make good TV. But it illustrated the point really, really well. You know, properties with stairs with loose carpets on that are actually dangerous, broken windows, damp and rot that weren't being attended to. And these were landlords that had money. They could have fixed it anytime they wanted like that. One of my favourite things is there was a landlord and his partner, and literally after 24 hours, the partner refused to live there anymore, where she had no idea of what was going on in the business. She just said, no, I'm not doing this anymore, I'm off.
Wow.
But he chose to stay, and then naturally chose to fix the property afterwards. But it should never have got to that stage. So yeah, anything that cleans up the act and makes the rental market better for tenants, generally, I'm actually in favour of.
And on that, since we're talking about media alerts and media interference in this market, some of the worst landlords are the housing associations. I don't know if anybody watches ITV News and their reports on social housing, but the lack of funding has almost destroyed the social housing market. People are living in absolute squalor. It's disgusting and disgraceful. Um, so I suppose it's swings round about. Simon, you bought your house not long ago. Were you renting before? What was your experience of the rental market? You're younger than us.
So we rented for a year before we decided that we were never going to buy if we were going to rent and move back in with our parents. But to be fair, the landlords were as good as gold, I have to say. Couldn't do enough for us, and the flat needed painting. They just knocked off a month's rent and said, "Get it done yourself," type thing. So personal experience is okay. But yeah, I understand there's a lot of issues.
I work
out
with
there.
a lot of case studies, a lot of buy-to-let landlords, and over the course of working with you guys, but I also externally in my day job, as it were. And actually, there are some brilliant ones out there. And Phil, we kind of recognise that with the limited company buy-to-lets. We've said, look, we want you guys, we want to be able to give you the value is, and I think that's where it's swaying, isn't it? We're getting away from this hobby landlord, and we are moving more towards these professional landlords who really do know what they're doing, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're seeing that, and I agree with all of Nick's points that if it takes out the rogue landlords that perhaps we don't see, then that's no bad thing. And yeah, I think we want the private rental sector to be as professional and ethical as possible. And I think the point is landlords need support in helping get their properties as energy efficient as possible as well, with the forthcoming legislation that's the EPC ratings need to be higher in future. So there needs to be innovation in our industry to help them get to the point where they need to be.
For such a large economy country, it's quite embarrassing that the stock of our housing is as bad as it is. We have to take our hat off to some of our European friends who have certainly got the market better. Let's hope we see some improvements. Whilst apparently in quarter 1, next story, this is from Mortgage Strategy, new home completions fell by more than 10% in quarter 1, according to the government. Number of new homes completed in the first quarter of 2022 compared to the last quarter of 2021 fell by more than 10%, according to latest figures from the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, who's getting a lot of time on this podcast today. 40,720 new homes were completed between January and March of this year, compared to 45,610 in October to December. I'm in two minds about this, Nick. A little bit of what you just said. Little spike at the end of the year, post holiday season. Are we going to have more completions then than we are going to start the year? We are in a very strange situation in the financial sector at the moment. What are your thoughts on this?
Again, I love a nice little statistic that creates a headline, and so then try and think: is there anything that may have caused it? I'm thinking, actually, didn't we just have a pandemic where work was suspended for a while? So, is it not possible that literally the houses that are being sold just physically weren't completed, ready to sell? And we've probably got a fair few builders who are thinking about the end of Help to Buy. Have they been scaling back some of their production in order to make sure that what they are building is ready and completes for the Help to Buy scheme before anything else is announced? if anything else is announced. Um, so I tend to think, right, is this a flash in the pan or is this a trend? And at this moment in time, I genuinely don't know. So I'm not convinced. Very rarely does anything go up in a sort of beautiful upward trend with no dips and all the rest of it. So if this is the dip in the middle and it carries on later on, then great. But I think there is an issue that is to be addressed, which is Help to Buy, because it has enabled so many
Yeah,
people to transact on new build properties. And without it, they would never have built so much. Not particularly happy to see the huge level of profits and bonuses paid out to some of the big house builders, some of whom have not produced particularly good quality properties. Thanks, guys. That's a legacy that we're going to have for a long time and enjoy spending your bonuses as a result. But we need something to replace it. We need to encourage not only home ownership for those who are able and willing to do so, but we need to encourage the builders to produce the properties and the councils to support the infrastructure for those developments.
Phil, you're nodding away. It's another one of your
yeah,
favourites. Go on, go ahead.
yeah, yeah. What it has been a really odd year. And I think Nick makes some really good points there. But one of the things we found is we're far as a lender we tend to do more purchases and remortgages naturally. It's our product portfolio set tends to lend itself more to the purchase market, and we're carrying a higher than ever um, pipeline of business that we're offering. So it's good business that's coming into the doors, but the time scale for completion is higher than it's ever been. So I don't know whether that's conveyancing issue or it's as Nick said, it could be a post-pandemic hangover. But there was that landmark survey a few months ago that was produced that showed that the average um, completion time for a purchase is now over 5 months, which so that's increased exponentially. So yeah, as a lender, we're sitting on a record level of pipeline of we've had business coming in through the doors, but it's not completing or it's taking longer to complete. Which I was speaking to other lenders as well. There seems to be a big slowdown in the in the purchase and completion process. So it's not just us, and why is that? But I think again, Nick raised a good point. Is it a post pandemic hangover that's meaning it's taking longer? I don't know.
I think we all have to go. We all have to kind of pluck it out there and try and think for ourselves a little bit because we've never had a pandemic before in our lifetimes. We've certainly not had the impact that
Yeah.
this pandemic had on any kind of market. It's destroyed every market. So I agree. It's a wait and see. Simon, sorry, I didn't give you a chance to have a chat on that one. And any opinions on this, or do you agree with the gents?
Yeah, yeah, I agree with the gents. Yeah, the levels of mortgage offer extensions sort of requests coming in is certainly supporting, the backlog in completions and the slower completions. But yeah, we've got untold in completions ready to go. They keep coming in the front end. They're just not going out the back end just as quick. So yeah, definitely agree.
We also have something that we did sort of touch on. Somebody did, I don't know who it was this the chain issues as well, conveyancing and how you're getting valuations. There's a huge skills gap in the legal aspect outside of the lenders. There is a huge skills gap. There's been a huge issue again caused by the pandemic of people retiring early, leaving the industry. There's been no new bloods coming through. In fact, we mentioned on the last podcast, we've been so proud that all of our valuers are like in their 60s and I've got so much experience, but you can only say that for a certain period of time before they get to retirement. And then nobody was coming through,
Yeah.
And so actually, I think it's not just us lenders, and those that seek and sort and supply mortgages. Actually, we need to look at the entire industry and say, where's the good blood? Can we attract them back in? For those that are listening, this is currently the end of June 2022. We're currently suffering from strikes and potentially more strikes. There is upheaval across the board, and the pandemic has influenced a lot of that, and a lot of us are feeling the pinch. So yeah, interesting one. I want to talk about something. Actually, it's Nick planted this. So Nick, this is your chance to have your say. Anybody who does listen to this podcast regularly or does follow me on Twitter will know that I've got quite a lot of opinions on a lot of things. And one of the things I hate is washing. What I mean by washing is rainbow washing for the gay community and various other things. And then we have another one called greenwashing. Now I'm going to bring this up. And we're going to talk about green finance for a minute because I'm a big champion and I believe that it can be done in a really good way. But I think I might agree with Nick a little bit here. Just a caveat, I don't work for any financial organization. I'm an independent. Um, I think that the market is greenwashed. I think there is no green finance that's working exceptionally well. I'm not saying there are not great products out there because there are. What I'm saying is, I think there's a lot of greenwashing going on. I think there's a lot of trying to tap into something that isn't there because actually, when you speak to a borrower, do they really care? We don't know yet. So go on, Nick. You have some thoughts on this. Do you think the green products, are really that inviting? Do you think they're going to make any difference? And do you think they're worthy of their space in the market?
Okay.
That's a tough
I'm
question.
definitely going to start this one. This is my personal view and not the view of Corico.
I would just like to, caveats plenty.
And what I'm about to say is not actually to have a dig or anything sort of particularly against any particular lender. It is literally the subject as a whole. And I usually preface it with things like, well, any green mortgage that's badged as green, it's got green in the name, or energy efficiency mortgage that's badged up as such, which has got £250 off the product fee and an extra 0.05% off the rates, is utterly pointless. And which sounds really harsh. But
can you elaborate slightly? Because
yes,
maybe just give us a bit of detail on that.
Because, I don't think it's fair to put statements out there and not try and give you some kind of context and meaning. But if a lender produces a green product along those lines and said we're trying to incentivize people to have an energy efficient property, be that buy-to-let or residential, the problem for the consumer is if another lender is offering a product which is a little bit cheaper anyway, why not go for the cheaper product in the first place? And it doesn't matter that the green one's actually there. So is it actually going to do anything to affect the housing stock in the UK? And I kind of think no. And it's almost similar with some of the versions of these sort of green products for new build. Well, the vast majority of new build properties have to adhere to building regulations to make them energy efficient anyway. So if someone's buying one of those properties, they're buying one by default that is energy efficient, and therefore they're getting a green mortgage product, which might be a fraction cheaper to fund what they were going for anyway. So it doesn't ring true, because what we actually have to do is improve the energy efficiency of the housing stock of the UK and France and Germany and America and China and Russia and everywhere, absolutely everywhere in the world. It is one of the biggest causes of sort of greenhouse gases being used is to heat houses which are inefficient. And no, there's huge problems in it, but we can't just give 250 quid cash back and a tiny little bit off the rate and say that we've done the job. Sorry, we haven't. Not even close.
And it's not like there's any incentive across most of these products, is there? Because you just said the incentive, 250 quid off a fee, is not going to encourage me to go for that mortgage. 0.5% is probably not going to make any change to me.
Exactly. And if it's say let's extend it slightly and say, okay, that's £1,000 cash back. Yeah, but if the interest rate is 0.3% higher and it's £300,000 mortgage, you're going to pay that in extra interest in the first year of 2 or 5 years anyway. It just doesn't actually stack up as something that's going to make a consumer go, do you know what? I'm going to get a property that's an energy rating of D, and the mortgage is actually so cheap that I can now improve the energy and do some works to my property to make it more energy efficient, so it's a C rating, and that will justify me taking out the mortgage in the first place. We need to actually get movement on the properties from an energy rating perspective. I saw one lender turn around and say that they were going to do reduced fees. Now, they have quite high fees in the first place, but it's reduced fees based on your energy efficiency rating. What they actually said in the small print was, if during the course of the product you improve the energy efficiency rating of your property, you can then provide evidence of that, and we will refund the difference in the fee that you would have had you had that rating at the beginning, which is an actual incentive to do the work and try and get £1,000 back. I think this is a really difficult situation that we are in, phenomenally difficult, and it will require group action across the entire industry, and it's going to be painful. And either as an industry, we look at it and act on it now, or we wait for someone to impose it on us.
Which
And if
do
we wait
you
for the
think is the better
imposition, it'll be
option? Do you think we should be being proactive before somebody comes and regulates us? Do you think we need to be doing this now?
Absolutely. So I don't know if any of the listeners will like the idea that I'm about to put out there, but I think that there are many ways of doing it. The way I think is genius, naturally, because it's my idea. And lenders might turn around and think, no, that's not even close to genius, that's miles off. But it has to be something along these lines, I think, which is that every mortgage should come with an interest-free loan of up to £10,000, which is roughly the amount the government energy grants are based upon. And that money is to be made available to the borrower via a central unit that will actually get the work done on the property. They will pay the tradespeople to do the work. So the money from this £10,000 interest-free loan does not go to the borrower. So they can't go out and suddenly buy themselves a new Mercedes.
Or pick their own overly expensive or
Or
ridiculous
fit their own.
or
Yes,
completely useless equipment. Yeah.
Yep. When the work is done, the lender via the central unit actually gets a new EPC rating carried out to evidence that the property's gone up from a C to a B, from a D to a B, from D to C or whatever it is, to evidence that the work is done, that the property is more energy efficient. The borrower then just repays the loan as per the mortgage, but on capital only. So there's no interest cost. Then, of course, if the property is sold or it's remortgaged, then the whole debt is actually paid off.
Okay.
This would enable...
That's really interesting. It's quite a lot to digest there, Nick.
Yes.
And actually, one of my suggestions a while back when I was talking to a group, I did a speech. One of my suggestions was that every sector needed to have a green committee made up of people from the industry associations. In this case, it would be like someone from the Building Site Association, someone from banking organisations, senior people alongside day-to-day every lenders, representatives of small sectors, and come together and develop this idea. Be proactive about it and do something about it and see what options are available.
Yeah, and the clock is ticking. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse.
So, Phil, that was a lot to digest. I knew Nick wanted to say something.
Yeah.
I was just like,
my head's exploded.
Okay, well, Phil, come on. You can do your blatant plug in a minute, but just let's have a quick chat about what Nick just said.
Look, I mean, I agree with everything of the sentiment and the idea. It's really bold, and the industry needs something like that. Putting a lender's perspective on it, it's going to be really difficult to administer. I think that's the challenge. Is how do we turn that?
We need to get Mr. Gove in the housing sector to put that in place as a government initiative.
I can remember. I'm old enough to remember the days of lenders administering MIRAS, which was just sort of people getting tax relief, and that was an absolute nightmare for lenders, and that was quite simple in concept. This is just huge. I think it's a great idea, but it's how do lenders collectively operationalise
when it comes to I've heard this a lot when it comes to ESG, which is becoming the buzzword across the industry. People, the social agenda has increased massively through the pandemic. So is the environmental, and so is how businesses are governed. ESG is going to be the way forward. And I did a speech on it about 7 weeks ago, to some bit of an ESG geek. And one of the things I said was it's radicalization. It's going to take this radical move and a complete shift from the norm in order to put anything like this together. Simon, sorry to keep picking on you for your age, but you are a little bit younger than the rest of us. You are the market for these green mortgages. Apparently, it's the millennials, it's the Gen Z. They're going to want a green mortgage. They're going to want to save the environment they buy. But they're also first-time buyers, a lot of them with very little capital, no ability to save, possibly no house that they want they can have. Do they actually give a flying anything about a green mortgage in reality? Honestly,
Generalising here, but I don't think so. No, I think when it comes to buying a property and you can pay X amount or you can pay Y amount and you can have it as slightly green, but what's green about? I mean, again, sort of my view is not Saffron's, but I've been in this industry now for well over a year, and every week there's about 2 or 3 green articles coming out in the press, and nothing seems to change. They're all sort of similar, all aimed at A to C, where like the chaps have said, it's already energy efficient. So, in my personal opinion, I don't think first time buyers give two hoops.
it's really hard to say that without swearing, isn't it? I had to do it as well. I had to just leave it alone. Phil, come on then. Let's chuck out because we're back. We removed a green product and it's back. So let's talk about that for a minute. As to it is back and it's been refreshed. I'm not sure I'm allowed to talk about it yet, but I'll be the one getting in trouble rather than Tony this time. But it is back on the market and it's called a retrofit. So tell us a little bit about it, and we can see whether that might just tick a little box for Nick.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. We, as lenders, collectively, we all need to do more. But our retrofit mortgage, there is a degree, there is an amount of tangibility about it. So, we will give a 10%. Sorry, 10%.
No, just to
10
quickly jump
basis-
in here, we will not give 10% on anything.
No, we will give a rate reduction of 10 basis points if the EPC rating is improved to minimum of E, which so it's not aimed at the easy new build properties that are already A to C. So this is aimed at someone who is buying a typical UK housing stock property with a lower EPC rating, and they've got to get it above E. So I think there is there's a degree of tangibility about that. That's providing they complete the work within 6 months and they get a new EPC rating. I agree we need to do more, but I think this is a good first step base for lenders. And I've said before on this podcast, lenders need to have more robust and better further advanced processes to make it easier for brokers to transact further advances to improve property property EPC ratings as well. And it'd be nice if we can get to a stage that all our properties are there's energy improvement rewards on them rather than having one product. But we do have our retrofit products back out, and hopefully we can get some traction.
Just to fill in the details a little bit there, Phil, just so that people know, the rate as you take out this mortgage, so before you do the work, is it higher than your typical equal product, or is it less, or is it?
No, it's the same, and then if within 6 months they improve their EPC rating, there's a 10%, there's a 10 basis points, 0.1% reduction on their rate.
I'm just clearing this up for the audience, just because it took me a little while to get my little head around it. Essentially, you could go from one product to the retrofit product if you identified that your building, your new home that you're buying, could improve its EPC rating for a few little bits here and there as you're doing a bit of revamp within the first 6 months, and then you get a discount. So essentially, you're not paying any more initially when you take out the mortgage, and you've got a chance to discount if you do the work in 6 months.
Yeah, but you have to apply for the mortgage on our retrofit product from the outset.
Well, yeah. So there's no punishment or immediate saving, but there's definitely no punishment.
No, there's no.
It's just not actually. The reason I'm asking this is a lot of green products are higher rated and then knocks down. So just to make it clear that we are coming in at
Yeah.
the same rate and then getting reduction.
Yeah.
Okay, so that helps. And again, it's all about
Yeah.
encouraging people to invest in their properties and get those EPC ratings up. So, it's all well and good. As you said, we've got some great new properties coming out. Well, they're perhaps not built the best, but they're a bit more EPC rated. But we'll see. We've run out of time. I could probably talk to Nick on this subject for a lifetime because I'm an ESG geek. So maybe we'll catch up another time, Nick. Maybe you can join one of my other podcasts on that because I'm looking for opinion. So I'll be in touch. For the rest of you, that's it for this month. That was really good, guys. It's really interesting take on where we're at. We are in a difficult time. Just to remind the viewers, this was recorded at the end of June 2022, in case you listen to it in the future. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to click the subscribe button on your favorite podcast channel. So whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, just click and we'll get notifications every time a new episode comes out in the series. But for now, Simon, Phil, and of course our special guest Nick, thank you so much for joining us today. That was really good, and thanks for the personal opinions, guys, as well. It's been a pleasure.
Brilliant.
Great stuff. Well, we'll be back in
Cheers,
August
Jack. Thanks,
when
Jay.
Tony returns with our next SFI Not So Live. And keep an eye out because August will see the return of season 3 of SFI Live, our webinar series, which is having a revamp. So we'll have a brand new style of webinars starting also in August. But for now, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next month.